Nice.
Don't do anything stupid.
Me? Never.
Another year, another zombie outbreak, and this time Leon is not only hot to trot, but he has a new partner in zombie-slaying path-traced action. Now we know what to expect with our Raccoon City adventure, but just how much life is left in the RE engine for our 9th entry in this 3-decade-old franchise? Let's take a bite of the good stuff. Now the RE engine is approaching its 10th birthday, almost as old as the MT Framework engine it replaced with 2017's Resident Evil 7, with the Biohazard series celebrating 30 years this year, coinciding with this new game being set 30 years after Resident Evil 2. I know, Leon, I feel even older. But like Leon, it's continued to age with grace, learning new tricks now in its PC and current gen console only release. Yes, ray trace reflections were added to previous games post-launch, but it is improved here and exclusive to PC, now also supports full path trace lighting. But what does that actually mean? Well, lighting, shadows and detail are all ramped up dramatically, with the core RE engine always being built around and to replicate film quality lighting, physically based material reactions and photogrammetry, aka digitized assets for old money. Always delivering a realistic, gritty but stylish look that balances film and fiction very well, with a keen focus on faces, eyes, flesh, gore and more so recently hair. Building on RE4 Remake's hair splines, which were more an afterthought, here though, Leon and new protagonist Grace, and even some enemies and monsters all have polygon-based hair geometry that collides, self-occludes, and supports subsurface scattering, which is clearly the baseline for the models and art design team. The old card system is still present, but unlike the previous game, the visual change is too stark, and it's very hard to go back once enabled. Ah, L'Oreal, you were always loved.
Hey, over here.
Now, lighting-wise, it still supports old-fashioned rasterized lighting, ambient occlusion, cube maps, shadow maps, screen space reflections, and great art. In fact, art and lighting are still the main pillars of this title. Vitally so for consoles, as only the PS5 Pro supports any ray tracing at all, with base PS5, Series X and S and Switch 2 only offering the baseline option of rasterized lighting. Not so for PC, where we can bump it up to ray tracing in two guises, normal and high, and then the top-end path trace choice, which is exclusive to Nvidia cards, and adds a few more features I'll get to in a moment. Now, ray tracing only adds ray trace reflections, with planar surfaces like wet signs or bathroom mirrors, glass and car windows, all reflecting both static and dynamic objects, such as yourself, zombies, or busy suit men and women going about their working day. Now, the two modes really only seem to differ in rays per pixel and possibly the denoising filter, with reflected objects from within the BVH proxies being slightly more stable and less jittery. Path tracing is the holy grail, offering a full lighting facelift over the raster-based light and shadow system. Reflections remain, although now much more stable and cleaner, helped by Nvidia's ray reconstruction now being engaged by default in this Nvidia exclusive option. Now, sadly, this is disabled and locked out of just the ray tracing mode, which is a shame, as it makes the increase to path tracing far bigger than they would ordinarily be. As you can see here on these grills on the floor, with the rain hitting them, very noisy and bubbling and sizzling in terms of the image quality, and completely stable, solid and well blended because of ray reconstruction here. I hope this is patched soon to add the option to enable this without path tracing turned on, as that is not always a viable option. Now, in addition to the enhanced reflections here, we also see more accurate and dynamic light bounce. Lights have a much longer cascade range and interact with more objects and characters. They create more shadows and have a greater level of light sources throughout. We see far more and much better shadows and self-occlusion on objects, and even very small triangle objects such as these cherubs on the door. Colour tones and surfaces have a greater range of reactions and subtlety between wet and dry, light or dark, and more, and all shadows now exhibit soft contact hardening and are more stable. And overall, surfaces and colour tones in many scenes can look different with path tracing enabled due to all these light elements factoring into the scene. Greater and more precise diffuse lighting is on top of that, along with emissive lights from shop windows hitting Grace's hair and clothes, and far greater accuracy in shade, irradiance, bounce, material reactions from wet skin, hair, brick, wood, or even disemboweled intestines, which in horror games works incredibly well here, emphasising atmosphere, building tension, and improving material, world, and model quality. Now, the animation team in Capcom RE Studios deserve a big round of applause yet again, and are top tier in the field. Again, we see the same superb physics-based locomotion and reaction system, covering many enemy types, limbs, inverse kinematics, and these are all mixed with canned animation sets from Leon doing a Jean-Claude Van Damme roundhouse before stomping on a zombie's head, or a zombie doing his best Ash impersonation with a chainsaw, clearly inspired by Sam Raimi's comedic style of speeded up action, as it fails to understand the mechanical beast it has in its hands and is then dragged across the floor, always aiming for you, mind, before return to the grave minus a limb or two. Now, incidental animations like this are great, as are the motion and performance capture in gameplay and real-time cinematics. Facial models remain excellent, and facial bone rigs are generally very good, but they can be the weakest aspect at times and even reduced over prior games, leading to stiffer faces and reduced emotion at points in the game, but it can be at a mixed level. The game also uses some level of environmental destruction, and although not procedural, is dynamic and creates a convincing level of physics within canned sections. Now, one area that is weaker is the big reduction in procedural gore and zombie reactions from the RE2 remake. Even RE3 was cut back, and here again we see some level of procedural limb, torso and head process, but this is, sadly, significantly reduced over the RE2 remake, confirming what I noted in my preview last month, which looked to be the case. However, what remains is still excellent, as are models, environments, hair and faces during the gameplay and real-time cinematics. RE Engine does continue to impress, although it hasn't moved up significantly in the last couple of years. Most of those benefits here are coming from the ray tracing and path tracing additions on PC.
Ashcroft, FBI.
FBI? What are you doing here?
Someone kidnapped me.
Victor, get in.
I don't know.
Well, we should leave.
So it looks great, but how does it scale across hardware within the player options? Now, as prior games, many options visualize the changes and the scaling bar tracks memory at the top and overall performance load below. Now, memory is vital, as I always say. You need to stay within 10 to 12% of your card's maximum VRAM, and here with two of my platforms, the Asus ROG Strix laptop with a mobile RTX 4070 chip and my RTX 5060, both offer an 8GB budget for all VRAM data, textures, frame buffers, etc. Now, as such, many of the options in my optimal settings tailor for 8GB or 12GB plus cards. The on-screen chart shows the base VRAM increases in the buffers when moving up the options stack. Now, ignoring the cost for ray or path tracing, DLSS scaling quality, or multi-frame generation frame buffers, which are fixed or scale once enabled, going from the lowest settings to the highest with the Raster feature set only, you will need over 1.6GB more VRAM, meaning on 8GB cards you have to pick your poison. But path tracing is still possible and playable on both of these cards. Now, max shadow maps, for example, cost nearly 1GB on their own, and max textures can saturate 12GB cards to a limit, so as they essentially create a bigger cache to store more textures, meaning the closer to the frustum or LOD bias each material or object is set, the higher the texture quality is. To avoid load settings, which significantly impact image quality, you are better dropping model quality and or shadows over textures. Now, unsurprisingly, the meat of the performance cost or gains come from enabling path or ray tracing, then resolution, than hair strands. Using the RTX 5060 8GB card at 1440p DLSS quality for all the tests, ensuring we have an approximate 750 to 900 megabytes of VRAM available for operating system tasks, etc., using normal textures and shadow maps, low model quality meshes, and normal AO, saving almost 250 megabytes of VRAM. Ray tracing, path tracing, and hair strands also consume approximately 1.3 gigabytes when all maxed out. So for 8 gigabyte and even 12 gigabyte cards, you need to balance this out. So ray tracing off versus on with hair enabled costs 31.65% to normal. Ray tracing normal versus high, a further 21.54% on that, meaning ray tracing costs circa 55% of your performance on this RTX 5060 and similar on all NVIDIA cards, going from off to on. High ray tracing over normal just improves the rays per pixel and therefore image stability. But overall, it's not a drastic increase, so if you want that 16%, definitely go for normal, which is close to what the PS5 Pro runs. Path tracing consumes a whopping 91.18% over ray tracing high, meaning from raster lighting to path tracing, the cost is over 205.88% higher performance with old school lighting in AO, diffuse, and reflections. So think on that before you enable it, but as I'll get to in a minute, there are ways to make all of this work out, even on this card. Hair strands consume approximately 18.27%, and this can increase if you have multiple characters on screen at the same time. And screen space reflections are free on memory, but not on performance, with almost 11% in performance sucked in once you enable them. Now, scenes with less SSR samples can be around 6%. However, my optimal settings leave these on, but if you are performance constrained, then it is a decent boost to think about. Shadows cost 10.5% going from low to max, but my optimal settings of normal are almost as good and cost near 9% less than the maximum settings. Now, model density or mesh in a menu cost around 16 megabytes of VRAM and near 7% going from low to standard. So again, it's definitely the one to turn on if you want to enable ray tracing and path tracing on these cards, and it can offer a tangible performance increase. Volumetrics can be around 8.3% faster, lowest to max, but the optimal level is normal, and that's near 4% faster than max for a hard to spot difference. AO can offer near 4% off versus max, but normal is good enough for less than 1% cost. This all adds up to my optimal settings, which you can see on screen, which offer near 20% performance increase over just maximum on my RTX 5060 and are practically invisible between the two. Most importantly though, they offer a stable base to push path tracing without MFG even on this card. To reflect the total cost in performance versus the visual change here, we take the same RTX 5060 at 1440p DLSS quality, lowest settings compared to max settings without ray tracing or hair enabled, we see a drastic visual increase. For 35 FPS loss, almost 40%. But using my optimal settings without, again, ray tracing and hair, we hover around 100 FPS, some 12.5% increase here, which looks visually identical, with the best case 20% coming when all worst cases combine. Now, enabling ray or path tracing now, though, will hit performance hard, down to the low 30s, a terrifying 261% frame rate cost, and now the benefits of multi-frame generation present themselves, and or using DLSS to claw back more performance. So going back to that 1440p DLSS quality with hair and path tracing on is too demanding on this card, even with optimal settings. Dropping down to DLSS performance now gains us 55%, now hitting 53 FPS. But balancing this out, literally, we can drop to 1080p DLSS balanced and now hit 66 FPS, almost doubling our performance by 94%. This presents a good image and top visual quality presentation, even for this entry-level card, with choice for options covered in the performance testing section. And more importantly, dropping to 1080p claws back that vital amount of VRAM so you don't run out during play. So starting with my Asus ROG G17 laptop, powered by 32GB of DDR RAM, Intel Ultra 9 185H 16-core CPU, and NVIDIA's RTX 4070, which is an 8GB mobile GPU. We have the full suite of features. Even though it has a 2560x1600 240Hz VRR or G-Sync screen, which is HDR, we are best targeting 60 FPS with path tracing on at 1080p DLSS balance or 1440p balance with ray tracing disabled. Now you could push towards 120Hz target at the same RT disabled setting, just at 1080p, offering a great choice of ways to play, and it looks and runs superb on the laptop, with PS5 beating choice of settings, and delivers an excellent way to play both local and plugged into a 4K screen. Moving up, the RTX 5060 is slightly more powerful, but is also limited by 8GB of VRAM, so the same choices need to be made to balance the available space versus resolution and features. 4K DLSS performance, no ray tracing, plus hair strands is possible, although it can still dip under 60 FPS in heavy sections. It will be at or above it most of the time. First person view, as noted earlier, can offer circa 10% or so performance gain due to the tight FOV, and adding ray tracing into the mix means 1440p DLSS balance is now needed, and it can exceed the 4070 laptop with slightly better performance. And then the final choice is still available, path tracing, now at 1080p balance with around 60 FPS or below in certain areas such as a rainy street, again pushing it way above Series X and even PS5 Pro for those path tracing options. Now the AMD card cannot run any path tracing at all, but it can run ray tracing, and due to its 16GB VRAM buffer, it can run 1440p FSR3 balance with ray tracing and higher settings, although FSR1 can be a better balance at times, but that's covered more in my next video. And because of the extra VRAM, you can turn things like LOD or volumetrics up higher because they don't really have that much impact, and the VRAM is twice the amount. In play, the boosts are not that visible though, so due to it offering more performance than the RTX 5060, it can run slightly better performance at 1440p FSR2 ray tracing high as the RTX 50 can with path tracing at 1080p. The 5600X though can be a limiting factor in the city sections, with all the NPCs limiting the GPU to get above 80 FPS. But in most sections it's GPU bound and not CPU bound, so maybe something else going on there with the actual game itself. Whilst maxed out though at 1440p is that sweet spot for this card, although 4K balance being an option with ray tracing disabled and hair strands enabled, but do expect it still to dip below 60 in some sections even in first person horror mode, both in the 1440p ray trace mode and the 4K non-ray tracing mode. But it does deliver better than console quality here again, aside maybe the PS5 Pro's image quality with PSSR2, as I said was coming again with my January database episode, does improve the visual quality here over both AMD FSR options. Finally, the RTX 5080, which is near to the top end you can get, although 5090s are still available, they're hardly common ground. The 5080 can turn everything onto max, 4K DLSS with path tracing turned on and all the settings maxed out, although you still need to target 4K DLSS performance, and you can still dip on occasion below 60 FPS. This is an option if you have a G-Sync screen, but the easier option is either A, to go to my optimal settings, which gains you around 20%, which is just enough to keep it close to that 60 FPS or above, or drop the resolution down to 1800p as a target output by setting a custom resolution if your screen doesn't natively support it, and then keeping it at DLSS performance level, and then you get arguably the same image quality but superior performance, and that can actually give you somewhere between 60 and 80 FPS when you push it to an unlocked level at 120 Hz. 120 Hz is a challenge. Only the 5080 can really achieve that. Ray tracing or path tracing on with high ray tracing at 4K though it still spends most of its time between the high 80s and low 100s, showing how demanding the game is with additive ray tracing and path tracing lighting elements. Now, multi-frame generation can help, and even on the RTX 5060 you can push a 45 FPS path trace 1080p output into the mid-80s refresh with a 16 millisecond cost to input latency, bumping 53.2 average PC latency native up to 68.5 with MFG, but the technology really needs a higher baseline FPS before enabling, in my opinion, as it can still present some extra artifacts around silhouettes, disocclusion and specular. Overall, the game engine is still impressive on PC. Shader compilation is fast, sub 40 seconds on my 9800X3D and around 1 minute 10 on my 5800. Loading is also fast, taking approximately 6 seconds from main menu to continue on my 5800X3D, around 3 seconds on the 9800X3D and slightly longer than the 58 on my 5600X. So CPU does improve loading, Kel Surprise. Some minor streaming stutter in sections when moving around can occur on occasion, and some memory access delays when cameras jump into dynamic animation sequences. It is rare, but it was often enough to mention. Also, a few bugs cropped up every now and then. Sometimes reflections stopped working, memory related likely, as was another where path tracing could disable on my RTX 5060, leaving a mixed lighting image but better performance, highlighting why my optimal settings balance both performance and memory cost.
Talk to me. Is this one like the others?
Well, same black blotches.
And it's not post-mortem lividity.
No. No, this is different.
Resident Evil continues to deliver high quality, fun, scary and above all enjoyable action. RE9 is a mix of RE4 meets Village and ramps up the pastiche parody of Dawn of the Dead into Evil Dead. It works, and the blend of vulnerable scares from Grace's chapters crossed over with Leon Statham's gung-ho is a great meld of genres. Technically, it still delivers excellent quality and performance, but the core models, assets, bone rigs and more can look dated without the newer ray tracing and path tracing hair feature set enabled. PC is where it looks, runs and works the best. The PS5 version is still great, but no ray tracing even at 30 FPS is a shame. The Nvidia path tracing does fix many issues with the game's visuals and elevates it drastically over the console version, even on the RTX 4070 and RTX 5060. Ray reconstruction is a huge boost to the ray tracing issues and denoising problems within the game's IQ, along with far superior shadows, real-time reflections, improved AO and material reactions, even on the base ray tracing mode over Raster. It elevates model scenery and more considerably. And as I've covered, the cost is high, and this title almost needs MFG to get close to 120 FPS if you're not rocking the best hardware out there. But it can scale across hardware so long as you disable these features or take a big hit on resolution. It would be good to see more choice in ray and path tracing, such as modular options, ray reconstruction for ray tracing, and better denoising, shadows and ambient occlusion for the base game itself, as some of the issues I noted are clearly a team baselining on the ray tracing feature set and thereby leaving the rasterized feature set a little bit lacking even in last generation areas. The RTX 5080 is a monster of a card and is the only card that gives the game a true 4K-like image quality, and although it runs well, even that card needs interpolation to deliver a 120Hz output with all rays being traced. Maybe later patches will offer more modular choices, but Capcom have delivered another hit here, and with the aid of Nvidia's technical chops, the RE engine has never looked so good, and at least it's extended its life for another year or so. And that's it for a deep dive into PC technology and all things Resident Evil related. Now, if you like what I do, remember I am completely self-funded and independent, and you can help by reading more on the website, liking this video down below and subscribing to the channel, which really helps my numbers, and also joining me over on Patreon to get early access, exclusive access, and also dictate the content that I create with my database videos by a couple of dollars or pounds a month. It all really helps. Anyway, I'm out, but I'll catch you very soon on the next one.